Welcome to Shep's Chat 203. Still in Chapter 2, still talking about the Constitution. All right, so when we left off, we talked about how Virginia had an amazing plan, at least for every big state that had a huge population, but not all the small states could agree on that. So New Jersey comes up with a plan. William Patterson gently reminds them that, hey, by the way, we're still currently supposed to be amending the Articles of Confederation, guys, so I don't really know what you're doing here. But he proposes a new type of government under a fundamental principle of one state, one vote, just like in the Articles of Confederation. Congress regulates trade and imposes taxes, which allows them to collect revenue, which will allow them to form a militia, which will allow them to provide a service of protecting the American people. All acts of Congress are the supreme law of the land. That's going to be a supremacy clause, and that's going to be super important when we get to the Constitution itself. Several people are going to be elected to the executive office, no one singular president or person, and the executives will appoint the Supreme Court. This basically keeps the Articles of Confederation intact, but it adds a supremacy clause or doctrine which says that the federal government is supreme to the state governments. So we come up with a great compromise, July 16th, because, well, it's hot and it's summer and they want to get out of there. And Roger Sherman from Connecticut, who is Roger Sherman? Most people don't remember him, even though he's pretty important that he comes up with this compromise because it establishes the way our entire government is set up. And he comes up with the idea of a bicameral legislature, and the upper chamber has 2 members elected by the state legislatures, and the lower chamber is based on population. So the upper chamber, which we now call the Senate, had 2 members, so 100 total. By today's standards, back then, 26. And those people were chosen by the state legislatures. That's not until a constitutional amendment later that the American people actually get to choose their senators. And then the lower chamber is based on population. However, what makes up your population? So this is one of my favorite things about American history. Like, we're going to decide that people are 3/5 of a person. So predominantly in the South, they want to make sure that the African Americans / slaves that are considered property are also considered people when it comes for voting. And the North, in the case, is they're not people, which is odd because the North is normally the one that's like, hey, they're people, not property. Stop selling them and abusing them. And in the South, where they normally say they're my property and you have to bring them back to me, all of a sudden wants to tell you that they're people. So we come up with a 3/5 compromise. The African Americans are going to be counted as 3/5 of a human being, not a full human being, 3/5 of a human being. And then they have that verbal agreement to not even discuss ending the slave trade until 1808. Some odds and ends about the Constitution. Why don't we tax exports? Well, because the South had a lot of exports, and they wanted to make sure that Congress couldn't control them. So Congress can control interstate commerce, but they can't tax exports because of a deal that they made with the South. Who makes the courts? The Constitution says, I give you a Supreme Court. Congress, you do the rest. You're going to have to set up all the lower courts. The president is going to nominate the federal judges and the Supreme Court judges, and then the Senate is going to approve them. And then, why is it like this? Why did we get the Constitution? How did it end up this way? They needed every state's support, so they had to compromise. So 3/5 of a human being doesn't really sound like the best idea right now, but it was the best that they could do that everybody would agree with. And that was what was really important, was getting everybody behind something. So we come up with the Madisonian model. We have separation of powers, which is intended to prevent tyranny. So we have 3 branches of government. We have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch. And no one branch is allowed to have enough power that it can dominate the other 2 branches. The legislative branch, which is really the most important, even though we kind of look at the executive as being like, woohoo, but the legislative branch makes the laws. The executive branch enforces the law, and the judicial branch interprets the law. And this was how Madison envisioned it being set up, and exactly what it still looks like today. This system of checks and balances allows for Congress, the president, and the judiciary to make sure that nobody's doing the wrong thing. A graph like this is in your book. These are things you need to know. You need to know how the system of checks and balances work. You should have specific examples of how checks and balances work. So the president can veto a law, but he can pocket veto. The Congress can override a veto unless, well, it was a pocket veto. The Supreme Court can declare laws unconstitutional. The legislature can revise the Constitution. They can amend it. You'll need to have specific examples of those. As we go through, we'll have a section or a unit on the presidency, a unit on the legislative branch, and a unit on the judiciary, where you get a little bit more information, but make sure you know about checks and balances. So go over this part in your text, review it, make a list, make your own chart, make your own graph, do whatever you have to do, but know about checks and balances. The idea of separation of powers came from Montesquieu, who is a French theorist, and it also came up with the ideas for the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. So although we give the credit to Madison for our Constitution, he actually stole them, similar to the way that Thomas Jefferson stole from law. The executive branch, they had some decisions they had to make. Should it be a plural or a singular person? Well, I think it's because George Washington is so popular and so amazing that we have a singular executive branch with a head, because they knew that they could trust him. Then they had to decide, how are they going to be elected? Do we want the common people electing the executive? Ugh, the common people, they're not really smart. And we certainly know that it wasn't common people that were sitting around at the Constitutional Convention writing this. So they decided to give power to the elite. And this is where we get the Electoral College from. And there have been 5 times in United States history where the least popular candidate has won because the elite that make up the Electoral College have voted the other person in. The most recent example of that would be when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton in your election last November. The federal government is also set up with a federal system. The federal system is a division of power between the national and state government, where the national government is supreme. States have the power to make laws in regards to the concern of their citizens. So if you think about marriage or schools or voting, those are going to be more state powers. The federal government has more power over the states than in the Articles of Confederation, however. That's because they have the supremacy clause. So instead of being independent states that can control themselves, they are under the rule of the federal government. September 17th, 1787, the people at the Constitutional Convention say, we're ready, it's done. 39 out of the 42 delegates vote yes, and it gets sent out for ratification. Now, the crazy thing is this what they were ever supposed to be doing in the first place? No. In the first place, they were just supposed to be amending the Articles of Confederation. So this is already going to be kind of a hard sell. They're going to have to figure out a way to convince the states that they should agree to this. There are some fundamental principles in the Constitution that they need them to agree on. One is popular sovereignty, and that is the power comes from the people to be an independent country. 2, a republican government where the people choose representatives to make decisions for them. So the people aren't going to be able to make each decision like in direct democracy. They're going to choose people that they want to vote for them. Number 3, limited government with written laws. So there's no common law. There's nothing that says, well, it's just always been that way. No, it's either written down or it's not the law. Number 4, separation of powers with checks and balances on each branch to make sure that no one branch has more power or is dominant over the rest. And then 5, it is a federal system that divides power between the national and state government, giving the national government supreme authority over the state. You should know those 5 fundamental principles. They are the fundamental principles that make up your American government. Popular sovereignty, republican government, limited government, separation of powers, and a federal system. Know those 5. All right, the road to ratification. Each state was told to hold a convention, and that 9 out of the 13 states needed to approve. Wait, so to amend the Articles of Confederation, you had to have it be unanimous, but to just scrap the Articles of Confederation and start all over with the Constitution, they only needed 9 out of 13. So, all of a sudden, this handful of elitists have thrown out our current government, created a new government, and aren't following any of the old rules, and it's what we celebrate today as one of the most important documents ever. Sounds like a good deal. On the road to ratification, we have a battle between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and you already know all about that. The Federalists want a strong national government. The Anti-Federalists want more power to the states. All right, it starts with semantics for who is going to win this battle. The Federalists, who wants to be an anti-anything? It just sounds better to be a Federalist. The Federalists had actually been at the Constitutional Convention. They knew the deliberations. They knew what the different components were. The Federalists tended to be wealthier, which brings about more power. And then they were able to communicate to the masses. They had the ability to communicate via newspapers a lot quicker and easier. The Anti-Federalists, however, also had some benefits of just being